My 11th graders, today we're going to be talking about water. But before we can talk about water, we need to talk about some of the amazing features that make water happen, and that's atoms and bonds. So we'll do a quick overview of that. So some of the big questions you should be trying to answer by the end of this portion of the lecture is: what is matter? Where does it come from? How do atoms interact with each other? And how do these interactions of atoms lead to the emergence of the raw materials necessary for life? So, kabloom! After the solar or the galaxy was created, we had all these atoms. Now, just what are we supposed to do with them? Well, let's make some life. So what are these atoms of which we speak of? Atoms are the smallest fundamental unit of matter worth considering in biology. There are 120 different kinds of atoms or elements that you would find on the periodic table here. So remember, we've talked about before, elements would be like helium, oxygen, hydrogen, okay? Biology is made of 4 major elements. So sometimes biologists will use the acronym CHON for carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Those are the most important 4 elements that make up life. 10 minor, which you can see here on this list, where they're calling trace elements like calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, sodium, chlorine, and magnesium. And then 30 to 50 trace elements, but the trace elements are just as important. So you can see here someone has goiter, which is when the neck becomes enlarged because of a lack of iodine in their food. And here in this picture, you can see various nutrient deficiencies in plants. So on the far side here, or in this middle one here, which looks actually really pretty with a slightly red tip, this is from a magnesium deficiency. So you can see that it affects plants and animals. Okay, so let's talk about these bonds that are going to bond these elements together. So bonding is accomplished by electrons interacting between atoms due to valence considerations. So valence shells are the outer rings that are around these elements. So there's 2 major kinds of bonds that hold atoms together, and it's because of the interactions between these valence shells. So the first kind is ionic bonds. So this is where there's a transfer of E's, which is electrons. Not many possible combinations, so it's kind of boring. But salt, which is one of my favorite things, is an example of an ionic bond. So you can see here that in the sodium, it has an extra, it only has 1 out here in its outer valence electron, which means it really wants to, it's alone, it really wants to find a friend. Where chlorine has 7, and it just needs 1 more to make it perfect and feel whole and balanced. So they share that electron, and it creates this ionic bond or interaction between them, and that creates salt, a new emergent property. The other type of bond that we talk about a lot of time between elements is a covalent bond. This is an extremely important bond. There is functionally infinite combinations, and all are important biological molecules like glucose, so sugar, DNA, are all covalently bonded. So it's a sharing of E's or electrons. So what you see here in this picture is it's like they hover next to each other and they share that same electron. So if I zoom in here on oxygen, for example, you can see that they are sharing these, and that's what the symbol is here with these 4 dots. They're actually sharing these 4 electrons in their outer valence shell to make it 8, because normally it would be 6, but every element wants to feel whole, and they want to have all their valence electrons filled, and so that allows them to be attracted to each other. So here you can see that these 2 oxygen molecules are sharing the 2 that each other have, and that makes it 8. So we have ionic bonds and covalent bonds. But not all bonds are created equal. So that's where polarity comes in. So what we were talking about before is the bonding between elements, okay? But polarity creates another type of bond called a hydrogen bond. So polarity is the unequal sharing of electrons in a covalent bond. So I want to make sure we're clear on this. In one water molecule, the bond between the hydrogen and the oxygen on either side is a covalent bond. Okay, they're sharing electrons. But because of this sharing, it leads to an unequal distribution of charge in the molecule. So hence you get the hydrogen bond is more positive and the oxygen is more negative. So this is a polarity symbol. Anytime you see that, you know you're looking at a polar molecule. So polar molecules are attracted to other polar molecules. So in this image here, you're seeing a water molecule attracted to an NH3 molecule. So you can see that the positive hydrogen is attracted to the negative nitrogen. So a hydrogen bond is the strongest attraction between most polar molecules, and it's common in all biological systems, is hydrogen bonds. So this polarity that's occurring allows for hydrogen bonds, which allows for tons of emergent properties. One of the emergent properties that this hydrogen bonding allows for is shape. And like I've told you a million times, shape is very, very important in biology. Structure and function are always related. Shape determines function, and that's going to be what that object's job is. So for example, in this picture here, this is a cell membrane with different protein receptors built into it. And this is natural endorphin, which is when you feel good and happy, right? So you want endorphin. And this is morphine, which would help with pain. And they fit perfectly based on their shape into this like keyhole in these protein receptors. And when they fit in there, that allows your body to release these hormones, endorphin and morphine, and make you feel good. So very important. Shape, notice they're very different, but also in a way similar here because they are similar types of hormones that are used. But their shape allows them to fit into those receptors and then allows their function to occur. So all chemical reactions result in the breaking and forming of bonds. So if we're going to be talking about elements and molecules, we need to also talk about matter. So in any reaction, mass, energy, and charge are conserved. Nothing is ever lost, okay? Or that phrase, that famous phrase, matter is neither created or destroyed, right? So what you're seeing here is two different ways of expressing this molecule's chemical reaction, but you have two hydrogen or double hydrogens here, so you have two of them, and they're both two hydrogens, plus an oxygen molecule, which is here. And if you were to combine them, you're going to have two H2Os, right, in the end, because the two hydrogens are going to bond with one of the oxygens and same with the other one. If you were to do the math here, if you remember from chemistry for this hydrogen, if you were to just multiply the 2 times the 2, that means there's going to be 4 hydrogens involved in this and 2 oxygens. And if you notice here at the end, there's still 2 times 2, 4 hydrogens and an oxygen in the product. So the reactants are always going to still total up to the same amount in the product. They may not be the same molecular structure anymore, but none of them got lost. None of them have left the equation. Okay? So mass is neither created or destroyed, always conserved. And then, which we've talked about this before, the special thing about these bondings that can occur is that they lead to emergent properties. So the properties of a compound can be very different from the properties of their elements singularly. They can make an emergence happen when they bond together. So emergence definition would be the increasing levels of complexity in a system can demonstrate novel properties not seen in the levels below them. So if we're looking at this from a systems thinking approach, these would be the parts here, and then the salt at the end would be the outcome, the whole. So we're looking at these parts, sodium individually. I could analyze it, I could study it, and all I'm going to see is Na, sodium. I'm going to see its structure of what it is, and it looks very different than salt. And then chlorine, which is actually a very toxic gas. You would never think about sitting there and drinking chlorine. But when you put them together, you get salt, which is something you can eat all the time. It's an emergent property that's come from this molecule now, or these elements being combined, bonding together, which if you remember, it's an ionic bond, and that allows us to have table salt. So That's it for talking about bonds. So you should remember the terms elements, molecules, ionic bonds, covalent bonds, hydrogen bonds, okay? And and polarity. And this leads to emergent properties. So let's look at water more specifically and some of its emergent properties because of its bonding. Okay, water. So some big questions you should be asking yourself by the end of this is, why are you mostly made of water? How does water function in biological systems? And how does the structure of water determine its properties? So why is water such a big deal? Why are we always searching for it on different planets? Because where there's water, there is life. So here's an image of water ice on the tracks of a Mars rover. And so we've discovered that there's water on Mars. We've discovered that there's water on the moon. But remember, they're always frozen. Okay? But where there's water, there could be life. So water is needed for life. The chemistry of life is a solution-based chemistry. So the majority of any organism is going to be water. Earth is unique in its amount of liquid water. So if you look here, also, water is one of the few substances that exists in all three phases at normal terrestrial conditions. So you're looking at ice here on the far right, liquid water, and then gaseous phase. So water is unique that it can go through all three phases. And if you look here, you can see the distribution of Earth's water. So we have most of our water is salt water, so 97%, fresh water 3%. But of that fresh water, a lot of it is frozen. So 68.7% of that 3% is frozen. Then we have 30% of it underground. Thank goodness we know how to make wells. And then surface water. Okay? And think about the battle over surface water a lot of times and how when we interact with it, a lot of times we pollute it. So thank goodness some of it's protected by ice or underground. We do have the potential to pollute underground water too. Of this surface water, this 0.3%, this small amount, lakes have 87% of it, swamps have 11%, and rivers are 2%. So Earth is very special in that it has all of this water. So water's unique properties, there are many. All of them are due, though, to the polarity of water and its resulting hydrogen bonds. So remember, in the middle here, this first labeled water molecule is bonded together by covalent bonds. But these dot bonds here represent hydrogen bonds. And so notice the red oxygen is always facing the positive hydrogen. So the hydrogen bonds are what are attracting more water to this one water molecule. And it's all because of its polarity that was caused by the covalent bonds. So one of our first emergent properties that water has because of hydrogen bonds and its polarity is cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion is when water sticks together. So it's like the water molecules all start to move towards each other and they're connected by those hydrogen bonds. And there's also adhesion, which is when water sticks to other things. So picture water on a glass, like the condensation on a glass. That's water sticking to something else. So that would be adhesion. So water can do both. This allows for even another emergent property, which, like, for example, surface tension. The cohesiveness of water gives it a very high surface tension. So this water strider basically is walking on water because the water is creating a dense surface for it because it's light enough, though. Like, we couldn't do that because of our weight. But things that are light enough can actually walk on water because of this cohesiveness of water, and that causes the emergent property of surface tension. So cohesion itself is like an emergent property, but then surface tension is like a double emergent property. If you put adhesion and cohesion together, you're going to get something called capillary action. I'm sorry that's not written on this slide, but what capillary action is the ability of water to move upwards. So in this picture here, it explains it best. This is inside a xylem, inside a tree. So as water is evaporating or transpiring, transpiration is when water evaporates out of plants, as the water moves up, how is it going to go against gravity to get to all these leaves in the top of the tree? What water does is it sticks to each other and then it sticks to the side of the xylem. Then it sticks to another water molecule, and then it sticks to the side of the xylem. So right here, you're getting this zigzag movement of water because it's doing cohesion and then adhesion here, and then cohesion and then adhesion here. And so leaves get water out of their roots and from the ground because of this. So that is an emergent property called capillary action. Also, water has a high specific heat. So what a high specific heat is, it means that water, it takes a lot, hydrogen bonds take a lot of heat in order to break, okay? So they can absorb a lot of heat before they change their temperature. So specific heat, it would be how much heat is absorbed or released before an increase or decrease in temperature occurs. If we look at these different molecules, water is 4.18 joules per gram Celsius. So it has to absorb this much energy before it will go up to another degree Celsius. Ethanol is only 1.24 and iron would be 0.449. So you can see that it can handle a lot more heat before it actually changes temperature. Why is this so high? It's because of those hydrogen bonds, okay? Because they take so much heat, they can handle so much heat before they break. So this is why coastal environments are always so much cooler. If you look in this picture here of this coast along California, if you look inland, it's super red and hot. This is in Fahrenheit, but it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you have 90s, and then you have 80s, and then you have 70s along the coast. I felt like a weather reporter there. This is because this ocean water is absorbing a lot of that heat and keeping that air to be a cooler temperature because of the hydrogen bonds. Also, evaporative cooling. When we are feeling hot and sweaty, water takes, as it evaporates off of our body, it goes out into the atmosphere and it takes that heat with it, right? Because when we sweat, it's water and it's going to leave our body, which causes a cooling effect on us. So the fact that water can evaporate to a gas is one emergent property, but also that it holds that heat with it as it goes. So that's how we cooled off as we sweat. Ice also it floats, right? It has this weird property about it that it is less dense than its liquid form. So in ice, when we think of ice, it looks heavy and dense, but it's actually less dense because of those hydrogen bonds creates this stable structure. What would happen if the reverse were true? Ice would sink and our rivers and our oceans would be frozen. There would be no space for life to exist underneath that water. So far you're seeing that water is very important to us, that it can keep that high specific heat, and also in these environments for animals. Think about it in your body too. If you were to overheat all that water in your body, if it changed temperature really fast, you would be changing temperature really fast and you could get very sick. Also, another emergent property is water is a great solvent. So there is no universal solvent, but water is pretty dang close. It can dissolve almost anything except fats and cholesterols because they are nonpolar, so they separate. But in this case, you're seeing like sodium salt in water. When you and you learn this in the osmosis lab, but when you mix sodium with water, the ionic bonding wants to occur because of the polarity. So it creates these hydration shells where basically the water surrounds the sodium and the water surrounds the chloride, and then they separate and they dissolve into the water. This is another example of a large protein molecule that is being absorbed by water. Water can create a hydration shell around proteins because they're polar. It can do this with blood. Blood can also, it transports so many things because mostly blood cells, hemoglobin, are made of water. So it's able to help transport nutrients through our bloodstream, oxygen through our bloodstream, because it's able to, it's a good solvent for these polar molecules. Actually, oxygen is nonpolar, but because it's so small, it's able to be moved easily within the bloodstream. Also, water dissociates. Water is a big part of why pH occurs, or why we talk about things having acids and bases. So When water dissociates, it can produce hydronium, H3O+, which makes something more basic, and hydroxide, OH negative ions, which makes something more acidic. So in pure water, the concentration of these ions is equal. So acids will donate a proton, bases will accept protons. The pH, though, is the measure of the acidity. You won't have to calculate this, but so just for example, when we measure an acid, which is anywhere from 0 to 7 or 0 to 6 on this scale, those would be meaning that there's lots of OH negative ions. Where on the other side, where it's more basic, anywhere from 8 to 14, there's going to be more, oops, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. If you look here in the beakers, you can see it. If it's more acidic, there's more H+ ions, and if it's more basic, there's more OH negative ions for when water dissociates. So you're going to have, for basic things, it'll have more OH, and neutral would be equal of the two. So water dissociating is also what creates those acidic flavors and those basic things like soaps that we can use for cleaning. When we talk about pH in biology, we can tie this with ocean acidification. That's occurring because of the extra carbon dioxide that's in our atmosphere from burning fossil fuels. And this is having a big effect on our oceans, and we are going to talk about this more when we get to ecology, but the reason it's happening is because of water's ability to dissociate, and it's interacting with this carbon dioxide in the water. Okay, so there is one more thing I wanted to show you guys, is this slide here. So we need to be able to compare the thermal properties of water with those of methane. This is one example they want you, just so you can see the difference. If you look at the different properties of methane, they are covalently, well, what methane is it's a waste product of anaerobic respiration in certain prokaryotes. So what they breathe out methane, where we would breathe out carbon dioxide. Methane can also be used as a fuel. We use it sometimes to make gas. Gas like for stoves. If present in the atmosphere, though, it can contribute to the greenhouse effect and make temperatures hotter on Earth. Methogenic prokaryotes can be found in swamps, places like that do anaerobic respiration, meaning they breathe without oxygen. They can also be found in a waste or a dump site. So when you look at methane's characteristics, there's a lot of similarities, but the area that's here in red is that methane is nonpolar, where water is polar, which then allows for those hydrogen bonds to occur. So it's able to interact with so many other molecules. It's able to have a higher specific heat. It's able to have a lower melting point, or a higher melting point, and a higher boiling point because of those hydrogen bonds compared to methane here. So when you look at its ability to interact with changes of temperatures, you can see that being nonpolar is going to impact its ability, where water, because it's polar, is able to have these thermal properties that methane can't. All right, so that's it for today. I hope that was helpful. Please put your notes into ManageBack, and next class we'll talk about any questions that you have. Talk to you later.